18 people died inside Cook County Jail in just 1 year. Not over decades. Not across multiple prisons. One facility. 1 year. And most people have no idea why. These weren't all violent incidents. Many of these deaths happened quietly, inside cells, behind locked doors, in a system designed to keep people alive until their day in court. Cook County Jail is one of the largest jail systems in the United States. Every day, thousands of detainees move through it, waiting, processing, surviving. But behind that system, something isn't working. So what really happened inside those walls? And how do 18 people die in a single year, without more attention? "18 people died here in 1 year, the truth about Cook County Jail." In 2023, 18 people died inside a single jail. Not a prison. A jail. A place where most people haven't even been convicted of anything yet. 18 people. In 1 year. In one building. In the middle of America's third largest city, Chicago, Illinois. And almost nobody talked about it. Cook County Jail sits just 6 miles from downtown Chicago. It processes over 60,000 people every single year. On any given day, there are roughly 5,500 human beings living inside its walls, eating there, sleeping there, waiting there. Some for weeks, some for months, some for years, waiting for a trial, waiting for bail, waiting for a system to decide what happens to their life. But in 2023, 18 of them stopped waiting. They died. And the question nobody in power wants to answer is, why? That number, 18, didn't come from a conspiracy blog or a rumor whispered in a cell block. It came from official county records. Investigators who reviewed the data confirmed it was the highest death toll recorded at Cook County Jail in at least 2 decades. 2 decades. That means at no point in the last 20 years had so many people died inside that building in a single year. Think about that for a moment. Chicago is a city that has seen its share of tragedies. A city with entire news cycles dedicated to violence on its streets. And yet, somehow what was happening inside one of its most populated buildings, a government building, a taxpayer-funded building, was barely making headlines. 18 people. And by the time you finish watching this video, you're going to understand exactly how that happened. You're going to understand what conditions inside Cook County Jail actually look like. You're going to understand what the United States Department of Justice found when they went inside. And you're going to understand why, despite all of it, the deaths, the investigations, the lawsuits, the federal findings, the people in charge of that jail faced almost no consequences at all. But first, you need to meet the building itself. Cook County Jail is not a single structure. It's a complex. A sprawling, multi-division facility that covers nearly 100 acres on the southwest side of Chicago. Division by division, tier by tier, it functions almost like a city within a city, with its own rules, its own economy, its own hierarchy, and its own dangers. It is also, by nearly every measurable standard, one of the most overcrowded detention facilities in the United States. For years, critics, lawyers, and incarcerated people themselves had been raising alarms. They described cell blocks where men slept on floors because there weren't enough beds. They described broken heating systems in the dead of a Chicago winter. They described medical requests that went unanswered for days. They described a mental health crisis so severe that the jail had effectively become the largest mental health facility in the state of Illinois, not by design but by default. But those were just words. Just complaints. Just the kind of thing officials could dismiss with a press statement and a promise to review the concerns. Then came 2023. The deaths didn't all look the same. Some were classified as medical emergencies. Some were ruled suicides. Some remained under investigation for months. But what they shared, what connected each of those 18 lives, was that they all ended inside the same institution, under the same administration, behind the same walls. And when family members asked questions, they didn't always get answers. One case cut through the noise more than others. A man's family was contacted by jail officials after an incident. They were told it was a medical emergency, a health issue. Nothing out of the ordinary for a facility housing thousands of people. The family accepted that explanation, because what else could they do? Then they learned the truth. According to a federal lawsuit that followed, the man had not simply experienced a medical emergency. He had been physically assaulted, body slammed, beaten, by the people who were supposed to be keeping him safe. The people employed, paid, and entrusted by Cook County to maintain order and protect the human beings in their custody. The lawsuit didn't just allege the assault. It alleged the cover-up. That what had been described to his family as a health incident was, in reality, a violent encounter that should never have happened, and that the administration knew exactly what had occurred and chose to frame it differently. That is not a small accusation. That is a family being lied to about how their loved one was hurt. Inside a government facility. By government employees. And here is the part that should make you stop and think. This was not the first time something like this had been alleged at Cook County Jail. Not even close. For years, a pattern had been building. A pattern of complaints that never quite reached critical mass. A pattern of incidents that were investigated internally, resolved quietly, and filed away. A pattern that, taken individually, could always be explained. But taken together, across years, across divisions, across administrations, told a very different story. And the federal government eventually agreed. The United States Department of Justice launched an investigation into conditions at Cook County Jail. What they found inside that building, the documented evidence, the structural failures, the treatment of incarcerated people, led them to a conclusion that should have shaken the city of Chicago to its core. They called the conditions unconstitutional. Not concerning. Not problematic. Not in need of review. Unconstitutional. That is the legal equivalent of the federal government looking at an American jail and saying, what is happening inside this building violates the rights of every single person held within it. And yet, the jail kept operating. The same people remained in charge. And in 2023, 18 people died. So the question is no longer just what happened inside Cook County Jail. The question is, who let it happen? And more importantly, who made sure nobody found out? That answer is coming. But before we get there, you need to understand just how deep this goes, because what happened in 2023 was not the beginning of this story. It was the moment the story finally became impossible to ignore. To understand how Cook County Jail became what it is today, you have to go back further than 2023. You have to go back to the moment the warnings started, and the moment the people in power decided the warnings weren't loud enough to act on. Because here's the truth about institutional failure. It never happens overnight. It doesn't wake up one morning and decide to collapse. It erodes. Slowly. Quietly. One ignored complaint at a time. One unfiled report at a time. One unanswered grievance at a time. Until one day the erosion has gone so deep that the entire foundation is compromised, and 18 people are dead in a single year, and everyone in a position of authority looks at each other and says, how did we get here? The answer at Cook County Jail is that they had been warned. Repeatedly. Loudly. By lawyers, by watchdog organizations, by incarcerated people themselves, and eventually, by the federal government of the United States. They had been handed the roadmap to the disaster years before the disaster arrived. And at nearly every critical junction, the response from the administration was the same. Not enough. Not fast enough. Not serious enough. Let's talk about what life inside Cook County Jail actually looked like in the years leading up to 2023. The facility was designed to hold a specific number of people. That number, according to capacity guidelines, represented the maximum, the point at which basic operational standards could still be maintained. Adequate space. Adequate staffing. Adequate access to medical care, mental health services, and legal resources. Cook County Jail routinely exceeded that number. For years, the jail operated in a state of chronic overcrowding. And overcrowding in a detention facility is not simply an inconvenience. It is a multiplier. It takes every existing problem, understaffing, medical delays, security gaps, mental health crises, and it amplifies each one. A jail built for a certain population, running at capacity beyond its design, does not just strain, it fractures. And the fractures at Cook County were visible long before 2023. Consider the mental health crisis alone. Cook County Jail had, for years, been described by criminologists, public health researchers, and legal advocates as the de facto largest mental health institution in the state of Illinois. Not because it was designed to be. Not because it had the staff, the resources, or the infrastructure to serve that function. But because the broader mental health system in Illinois had collapsed so dramatically that people experiencing acute psychiatric crises were ending up in jail cells instead of treatment facilities. Think about what that means in practice. A person experiencing a severe mental health episode, someone who, in another system, in another era, would have been admitted to a psychiatric facility and given clinical care, was instead being booked, processed, and placed into a general population cell block. Into an environment of noise, overcrowding, constant surveillance, and zero therapeutic intervention. Into a system staffed by correctional officers who were trained to maintain security, not to manage psychotic breaks, not to de-escalate dissociative episodes, not to recognize the difference between noncompliance and a mental health emergency. The results were predictable, and they were documented. Incident reports filed over the years showed a pattern of responses to mental health crises that amounted to, at best, containment, and at worst, force. People in crisis were restrained. People in crisis were placed in segregation. People in crisis were isolated in conditions that mental health professionals have consistently described as likely to worsen, not improve, psychiatric deterioration. And some of them died. But here is where the story takes a turn that even seasoned investigators found difficult to process. It wasn't just that the conditions inside Cook County Jail were dangerous. It wasn't just that the mental health infrastructure had collapsed, or that overcrowding had pushed every system past its breaking point. It was that, according to investigators and whistleblowers who came forward, there was a culture inside the administration that actively resisted accountability. In 2025, an investigation revealed what insiders described as a hidden network operating within Cook County Jail's administrative structure. A system of nepotism, preferential treatment, and internal protection that insulated certain employees and certain decisions from meaningful oversight. People were hired not because they were qualified but because of who they knew. Misconduct was handled not through formal disciplinary channels, but through informal arrangements that kept incidents quiet and kept careers intact. This was not a single bad actor. This was not one rogue officer whose behavior slipped through the cracks. This was a pattern. A documented, investigated, reported pattern. And it explained something that had confused outside observers for years: how an institution that had been cited for unconstitutional conditions, that had been the subject of federal oversight, that had generated lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, had managed to continue operating with so little structural change. The answer was that the people responsible for making change were the same people benefiting from things staying exactly as they were. And then came the lawsuit that changed everything. The details had been circulating in legal circles for months before they broke into public consciousness. But when the full picture emerged, it was difficult to look away. According to the federal complaint, a man in the custody of Cook County Jail was subjected to a violent assault by correctional staff. He was body slammed. He was beaten. And in the aftermath, rather than documenting the incident accurately, rather than initiating the internal review process that policy required, officials allegedly made a decision. Documents, unlike people, don't change their stories. What the lawsuit alleged was not just brutality, reflex. The institutional equivalent of a system that had learned, over years of operation, exactly how to make problems disappear before they could become scandals. Except this one didn't disappear. This one became a federal case. And as that case moved through the courts, something else was happening simultaneously, something that would prove, once and for all, that the problems at Cook County Jail were not exaggerated, not politically motivated, not the product of disgruntled inmates with grievances to air. The United States Department of Justice was coming. And what they were about to find inside those walls would force even the most skeptical observers to confront a reality that the administration of Cook County had spent years trying to prevent anyone from seeing clearly. The conditions were unconstitutional. This kind of concealment was not an isolated incident, but a practiced response, a reflex. The institutional equivalent of a system that had learned, over years of operation, exactly how to make problems disappear before they could become scandals. Except this one didn't disappear. This one became a federal case. And as that case moved through the courts, something else was happening simultaneously, something that would prove, once and for all, that the problems at Cook County Jail were not exaggerated, not politically motivated, not the product of disgruntled inmates with grievances to air. The United States Department of Justice was coming. And what they were about to find inside those walls would force even the most skeptical observers to confront a reality that the administration of Cook County had spent years trying to prevent anyone from seeing clearly. The conditions were unconstitutional. But the question that nobody had yet answered, the question that the DOJ investigation cracked open like a fault line beneath the entire institution, was not just what was happening inside Cook County Jail. It was how long the people in charge had known. Because the evidence suggested they had known for a very long time. And they had made a choice. When the United States Department of Justice opens a formal investigation into a county jail, it is not a routine audit. It is not a paperwork review. It is not a friendly site visit with clipboards and checklists. A DOJ civil rights investigation is the federal government deploying its full legal authority to determine whether American citizens, people in government custody, people who by definition cannot leave, people who are entirely dependent on the state for their safety and survival, are having their constitutional rights violated. It is, in plain terms, the last resort. It means every other mechanism, internal oversight, county review boards, state inspections, public pressure, has already failed. It means the situation has deteriorated so far beyond acceptable that the only institution with enough authority to force a reckoning is the federal government itself. And the federal government came to Cook County Jail. What investigators found when they went inside was not a surprise to the people who had been raising alarms for years. But seeing it documented, formally, legally, in the language of federal civil rights law, hit differently. The DOJ's findings described conditions that violated the constitutional rights of the people held inside. Not borderline violations. Not technical deficiencies that could be corrected with a memo and a training session. Unconstitutional conditions. The Eighth Amendment to the United States Constitution prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. The 14th Amendment guarantees due process, including for people who have not yet been convicted of any crime. Cook County Jail, at the time of the investigation, held thousands of people who were legally innocent. Presumed innocent. Detained not because they had been found guilty of anything but because they could not afford bail, or because a judge had denied it, or because their case was still making its way through a system that moves slowly even when it moves at all. These people, legally innocent, constitutionally protected, were living in conditions the federal government determined violated their rights. That is not an opinion. That is a legal finding. But here is the detail that investigators kept returning to. The detail that transformed this story from a tragedy into something more troubling. The administration of Cook County Jail had not been blindsided by these findings. Records showed that internal reports, legal filings, grievance documents, and outside advocacy communications had been raising many of these same concerns for years. The overcrowding was documented. The mental health crisis was documented. The gaps in medical care were documented. The use of force patterns were documented. The information existed. It had been compiled, filed, and delivered to the people responsible for addressing it. And the response, year after year, administration after administration, had been insufficient. Not absent. Insufficient. Which in some ways is worse. Because it means the system was not ignoring the problem out of ignorance. It was managing the problem. Containing the visibility of the problem. Doing just enough to prevent any single incident from becoming the catastrophe that forced genuine accountability, while never doing enough to actually fix what was broken. That is not negligence. That is a choice. And then there were the deaths. 18 people in 2023. The highest toll in at least 2 decades. When county officials were pressed for explanations, the responses followed a familiar pattern. Medical complications. Pre-existing conditions. Ongoing investigations. The kind of language designed to distribute responsibility so broadly that it lands on no one in particular. The institutional equivalent of everyone being accountable, meaning no one is accountable. But the families of the people who died were not satisfied with distributed responsibility. They wanted names. They wanted timelines. They wanted someone to sit across from them and explain, in plain language, how their loved one entered a government building alive and came out in a body bag, and what exactly the people paid to prevent that outcome had done or failed to do in the hours and days before it happened. Most of them are still waiting for that conversation. The corruption investigation that emerged in 2025 added another layer that reframed everything that had come before it. If the hiring practices inside Cook County Jail's administration were as compromised as investigators alleged, if positions of oversight, positions of authority, positions responsible for flagging misconduct and enforcing standards, were being filled not by qualified professionals but by personal connections, then the failure was not just operational. It was structural. It meant the oversight mechanisms themselves had been corrupted. The people who were supposed to catch problems were the people who benefited from problems going uncaught. The people who were supposed to hold officers accountable were the people protecting officers from accountability. The entire internal accountability architecture, the grievance systems, the use of force reviews, the incident reporting protocols, was being operated by people whose primary loyalty was not to the institution or to the people in its custody, but to each other. When you understand that, the deaths don't just look like tragedies anymore. They look like the inevitable outcome of a system that was never actually designed to protect the people inside it. So where does that leave us? The DOJ findings are on record. The federal lawsuits are active. The corruption investigation has been reported. The death toll is documented. The unconstitutional conditions have been named, legally and publicly, by the highest law enforcement authority in the United States. And Cook County Jail is still operating. The same institution. The same walls. The same divisions and tiers and cell blocks where, in 2023, 18 people took their last breath. where families were told medical emergencies happened when beatings happened, where a man was body slammed and his family was handed a lie in a clinical envelope. Still operating. That fact alone, that an institution formerly found to be violating the constitutional rights of its population continues to function with the same basic structure, the same basic administration, the same basic culture, is perhaps the most important thing this story reveals. Not about Cook County Jail specifically, but about the American detention system broadly. Because Cook County is not an anomaly. It is an example. It is what happens when an institution grows too large, too politically entrenched, and too structurally protected to be meaningfully reformed by the normal mechanisms of democratic accountability. It is what happens when the people inside, the ones most directly affected, the ones with the most detailed and urgent knowledge of what is wrong, have the least amount of power to change it. 18 people died in 2023. Their names are in a county record somewhere. Their families are still looking for answers that the institution has so far declined to provide. Their deaths are statistics in a report that most people in Chicago have never read. But you have watched this video, which means you know what happened. And knowing, genuinely, specifically, factually knowing, is the first step toward the only thing that ever actually changes institutions like this one. Pressure. Sustained, informed public pressure. If this story made you feel something, if you think 18 deaths in a single jail in a single year deserves more than silence, share this video. Because the only thing more powerful than a federal investigation is an informed public that refuses to look away. And subscribe. Because this is not the only story like this. Not even close. There are more jails. More deaths. More families waiting for answers. And we are going to cover every single one.